One, so sorry for the delay getting started here. We were having some technical difficulties. But welcome to our first ever Ask an Attorney Anything. My name's Heather Ward. I am one of our associate attorneys at the Legacy Legal team. Primarily do estate planning, but Meredith and I also work together on all of our business formation, business entity, small business law things. So that is why I am here today to talk to you guys about the Corporate Transparency Act. It's not really a new act. It was instituted in 2021. But what is new is what's called the Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting, which is set to go into effect January 1st. And it's a really big deal. So that's why we were here. And then, of course, at the end, you guys are free to ask whatever questions you want, whether it's on this topic or anything else. And we'll see if we can help you. So, like I said, U.S. Department of Treasury, their FinCEN department, so their Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, instituted this Corporate Transparency Act to try to deal with money laundering, tax fraud, basically terrorism through the use of shell companies. And so part of that was instituting this beneficial ownership information reporting. Starting on January 1st, 2024, a lot of entities are going to have to start doing this mandatory reporting. They're saying it's going to be about 30 million entities are going to be affected by it, of already existing entities, and about 2 million more per year after that. So it's a lot of people and it's going to affect a lot of our clients. So really, the number one question is, does my company have to report these beneficial owners? And what does that mean? So really any domestic or foreign entity that is doing business in the country because they filed a document with the Secretary of State or whatever that state entity is for us, here in Florida, it's the Division of Corporations or SunBiz was what everyone thinks of. So if you file a document with them to form your entity, you are what's called a reporting company. Same thing if you're a foreign corporation. So if you are from another country, but you're doing business here in Florida, you've had to file a DBA here. You also have to do this type of reporting. There are 23 exemptions of people that do not have to file. There's a lot of the reason why those people don't have to do the reporting is because they're kind of already overseen by other entities in the government, like the SEC. So the biggest exemptions that we'll probably be working with are, tax exempt organizations. Some inactive entities don't have to, but not every inactive entity. So that's something important to talk about with your CPA or your lawyer, to determine whether your inactive entity actually meets their definition of what that means. And the other one is what they refer to as a large operating company. So those are companies that have um, more than 20 full-time employees, at least $5 million in gross revenue, and have a physical presence here in the US. So those are three big exemptions to the companies that have to report, but basically any other entity, so LLC, corporation, partnerships, certain trusts, all of those entities are still going to have to report. So one of the things that those entities are going to be reporting is beneficial owners. That's the big purpose of this, what's called the BOI. So what is a beneficial owner? It's really anybody, whether it's an individual or a corporation, that is directly or indirectly exercising substantial control over the company, which of course is defined. We'll get into that in a second. So substantial control over the operating company, or who owns or controls at least 25% of the ownership interest of that company, which again is defined to them. They're, obviously lawyers were involved in this, and there's a lot of definitions inside of definitions. The good thing is we don't have to report the reason of why you're a beneficial owner, whether it's substantial control or the ownership interest. But if you meet either of those two things, you're going to have to be part of this beneficial ownership information reports. The other bad thing is we've got to report every single one of them. So if you have 20 beneficial owners because you have 20 people that, are on the board, or not the board, but are C-suite employees, so like CEO, CFO, those things, you have to report information for every single one of them. And there's no maximum of who it's required to be reported. So it can get tedious with some people. Um, so substantial control. Like I said, this is really going to apply to the high up officers. So senior officers like the CEO, president, CFO, COO, general counsel, or anybody that performs functions similar to what those people will do. But then it's also people that have the authority to appoint or remove those senior officers or a majority of the board of directors. Um, of course, they've got to throw in a catch-all that is anybody that's an important decision maker. So what does that mean? Some examples that they have given in their, handouts that they've been presenting for small business owners are people that direct, determine, or have substantial influence over important decisions made by reporting companies, including business decisions, financial decisions, and decisions about the structure of the company. So again, most likely that they're already going to have some sort of designation like president, CEO, CFO, but they don't have to. As long as they meet that definition, they are considered to have substantial control over the company and are having to be reported. Another thing to note is that a trustee of a trust can actually have substantial control, especially if, for example, your LLC interest has been assigned to the trust. So that is something that we are working on and making sure we're staying on top of our trust for that. The other part of it, so remember I said substantial control and ownership interest. So an ownership interest is, the obvious things like you own equity, you have stocks or voting rights, capital or profit interests in the company, or anything that can convert into those. So like options and non-binding privileges, those kinds of things also count as ownership interests. Again, in the estate planning context or the trust context, some things that we're looking into that haven't really fully given guidance on it, but things like the person who has the ability to dispose of most of the trust assets, a sole beneficiary who is entitled to income and principal of the trust, the person who created the trust that actually can fully revoke the trust, they're usually said to have, um, enough control or ownership interest, enough ownership interest to where they're going to have to be reported. There are a few exceptions, the biggest of which is, minors. They're not going to require them to report that information, and that differs from state to state, whatever the state's definition of a minor is. Um, if you have a future interest through an inheritance, so say, in a trust or in a will, you're going to inherit this interest in this company, but you don't have it yet because that person hasn't died, you don't have to report. And then creditors, they don't have to be part of this either. So we know what companies need to be reporting. We know what beneficial interests are going to have to be reporting. So what else needs to be in this? There's this other thing called a company applicant, which is going to be really interesting to see how they implement this. If your entity was formed before January 1st, 2024, you don't have to worry about this. Thank goodness, because we would have been going back who knows how long trying to figure out who submitted paperwork, which at our firm, who knows, like we can probably figure it out. But sometimes it's not very well documented for some people. So going back, we don't have to worry about it. But if your entity was formed on January 1st, 2024 or later, we have to report what's called the company applicant. So there's at least one. It's whoever physically files the documents, whether it's electronically or submitting it. Problem is that there is some confusion about how many people are involved in that process. So one example that they gave is, a paralegal and attorney both have to be on there because I, as the attorney, directed my paralegal to submit it. Well, I was controlling his application, my paralegal's application. So now we both have to report. There is some discussion that it's going to be limited at 2 people, but it's a little, there's some conflicting information on FinCEN's website about whether it's only 2 people or whether it's however many people are involved in the process. So that is going to be tedious if we need to do that, especially with the information that we have to report, which I'll get into in a little bit. But again, this company applicant is the person who directly files the physical or electronic document with the state. So submitting the articles of organization to Sunbiz, for example. So a lot of people have to be involved. So what information are we having to report for every single one of these people? Well, first we've got to report the company information. So, the full company name, any trade names or doing business as designations, we have to report every single one of those. And then the company applicants of whoever submitted that information to Sunbiz, as well as a U.S. address for a principal place of business and our TIN or EIN, depending on which one you have. For every single beneficial owner, every single company applicant, if it's after 2024, we have to submit full name, date of birth, and their current residential address. So their home address, not even the company address. And then a copy of a valid passport or driver's license or state issued identification. So that's a lot of personal information that is going to be out in the world. So this is what most people's biggest hang up about this type of reporting is just the hassle of it, but also all of this sensitive information is going to be reported to a government agency. Again, we're reporting a lot of it anyways, but there's some concerns about how the reporting is going to be done, and we'll talk about that. There are some special reporting rules for people that are exempt from this. Remember earlier I had said that a large operating company that has at least 20 employees, lots of revenue, and doing business in the US, they are an exempt entity. So, for example, if a large operating company owns 50% of my company, that means that, the person that owns half of the large operating company owns 25% of my company. Technically, they would have had to report because they have 25%, which is that threshold. So they would have to be reporting their information. FinCEN says that's an exception. They don't have to do that. They can actually just report their company information instead of their individual information. Another, again, exception, minor children, they're not going to have to report. Sometimes the guardian is going to have to report their information on behalf of the minor and then just make a designation that is on behalf of the minor who it has a current interest in entity. There is kind of a way around this, but not really. They kind of seem like they're trying to do us a favor here by saying we can file for what's called a FinCEN identifier. The problem is that when we do a application for a FinCEN identifier, we're submitting all of that information anyways. We still have to submit full name, date of birth, address, copy of driver's license or passport. When you file all the documentation for the BOI, you then submit your FinCEN identifier number instead of all of the information for yourself individually. But again, we're kind of already submitting it anyways. The other issue is we're not really sure how quick this process is going to be to apply for a FinCEN identifier. They are saying that it's supposed to be immediate, kind of like when you file for an EIN. But I don't know if that's actually going to be the case, especially when this is starting. But we will all find out together when we go to do the first one. And then corporations, or not corporations, but business entities can also file for one of these FinCEN identifiers. They just have to check a box when they submit their first BOI, and then they can obtain a FinCEN identifier. So yeah, it's a lot of information that needs to go in. How and when do we need to start doing these reports? So remember I said that this is going into effect January 1st of 2024. If your entity was established prior to January 1st, we have a year to get all of this information submitted. So that's great news. It's wonderful news for previous entities that now have to backtrack and try to figure all this information out instead of just knowing from the start. Entities that are formed January 1st or later, right now, they're saying it's going to be 30 days to be in compliance with this rule. There was a proposed rule that was submitted, I think it was a couple months ago now, and comments were due October 30th to extend that to 90 days. So we will see if that gets passed. That would be wonderful. They're basically realizing, hey, this is going to be a lot for people to figure out because there's really no guidance. The portal that we're supposed to submit everything through isn't even up yet, so nobody even really knows what it's going to look like. So we're hoping that gets extended to 90 days so that we have a little bit more time and a little bit more wiggle room to get that stuff submitted. But no matter which deadline, whether it's the 30 days or 90 days, we it's from the date of actual or public notice that the creation or registration of the entity was official. So whether that's a direct communication from the state that says, hey, your business has been formed, or you are now eligible to do business in the United States, or when it's put on a public registry. So, for example, if it's showing up on the Sunbiz website, you have 30 days from the day that that was published on there. Whichever date is first is when the deadline starts ticking. um, they're saying that all applications have to be done electronically. They are in the process of developing a secure system that they're calling BOSS. Um, Again, this is supposed to start in a month and a half about, and they're still developing it. So who knows? Hopefully it'll be done by then. If not, they, I'm sure, will release more information, whether it's just extended deadlines or if we will have to start filing paper. But they're saying right now they will not be accepting paper filings at all unless there's some exception on a case by case basis. They have not said what those might be. I don't know if it's just technical difficulties or what it might be. Um, but they are really going to be pushing for the electronic. Um, yeah, the problem is a lot of people are struggling with this being electronic and people hacking into it and getting all of this personal information, including residential addresses, copies of driver's licenses, and all of the business information. Um, we'll see. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, the good thing is that they are being a little bit helpful about it. If we do submit one of these forms, especially if we're trying to get it filed within that 30-day window, we have 90 days to correct any issues without any penalties or anything like that. But if you don't listen to me during this process or to Benson, um, there is up to a $500 per day fine for not being in compliance and criminal penalties up to $10,000 and up to 2 years in prison if you do not file this. So you listen to anything that I said today, think of the money and time in prison if you don't submit the um, and who this is really, such a big negative for is the people that own small businesses. These big companies that have all this money and all of these employees, they're exempted. They don't have to submit this stuff. And it's because they are being watched over by other government entities. But, the person that has an LLC for their residential um, rental that they have are now going to have to submit this. It's a lot for people that are just trying to use LLCs as, asset protection or things like that. Another thing that's going to be really difficult for some people is reporting changes or updates. So, for example, if there's been new things happening with the company, so you have a new trade name. So, like for us, we were Meredith Nagel PA, but now we're doing business as the Legacy Legal Team. We would have had to file a new update for that. If there's a change in any beneficial owners, so new CEO, there's been a sale that changes that 25% threshold. Have to report change for that. There's been a death of a beneficial owner. We have to report that. The good thing with deaths, we do have 30 days from the date of the close of their estate. So not just from the date of their death, it's at the close of the estate. So people have been notified that they're getting an interest in this property or this entity. But again, we still only have 30 days as of right now, unless they do some sort of extension. Right now, they're saying that there's not going to be continued reporting for if you dissolve or terminate the company. We'll see what happens with that as well. And again, there's no penalties if you realize that you messed something up and need to correct it. You have 90 days to correct it without any sort of penalty or fine. Most people's biggest concerns right now is the hassle, obviously, because this is going to be a lot for some people. And then the privacy and security involved in it. Um, a lot of other countries have actually been doing this for a while. There's a lot of chatter online saying, well, I don't think this is that big of a deal because, all of these other countries have been doing this for forever. We've been criticized by all of the other countries that we haven't been doing this. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad thing if it actually does what it's supposed to. And if we have enough direction of how to do it. The good thing is they're not charging us to do it, which I'm kind of surprised about. But there's no charge to file, which is great. And we don't have to file every year. We just have that initial filing and then anytime that there is a change. So they are making it somewhat easier on us than they could be, I guess, if we're looking for positives. Um, and like I said, security is a big issue. That's something that the first thing that we thought of is, oh my goodness, this information is going to be in a database somewhere. And so I'm going to read something that was on FinCEN's website. So they say FinCEN will only disclose information to financial institutions, law enforcement, and government agencies for compliance and anti-money laundering purposes. They will store all BOI reports in a centralized database and only share this information with authorized users for purposes specified by law. The database will use rigorous information security methods and controls typically used in the federal government to protect non-classified yet sensitive information systems at the highest security level. That's just a bunch of words that mean nothing to me until we know what it actually looks like, and how they are done, especially since it's not done yet. Like nobody knows what this is actually going to look like when it's finished. But hopefully they will alleviate our concerns, and this will just be just like submitting anything else that we submit. And like I said, they're requiring it to be electronic. So maybe at some point they will allow us to submit it by paper. Maybe they're just doing electronic because they know it's going to be such a big influx in the beginning from all the past entities. But I guess only time will tell. So I guess really that brings me to, okay, so what are we going to be doing as a law firm? Nothing can be submitted before January 1st. Like, system's not ready. We're not able to submit papers. Even if they have the system ready before January 1st, they will not accept any of these reports until January 1st. If you are a current client of ours, we will be reaching out to you via email, letter, however we can get hold of you. But please don't wait until you get that. Reach out to us. Give us a call. We will get you on the schedule to talk about this, what this will mean for you and your business specifically, and how we can make this an easy process for you. If you're a new client or you form a new entity with us, obviously this will be part of your business formation package. We will help you through this process and do it with you to make sure that it is done correctly. Again, 30-day window. We'll be complying with all of those things. We'll also be discussing, some possible changes. We might be discussing things very differently than we might have been a year ago. We're going to be talking about doing updates to your operating agreements to possibly put a specific person in charge of an annual review to see if there's compliance on this, or even more than that. For example, in an LLC, maybe one of the members or managers is the person that's in charge of keeping track of when the minor interests reach the age of maturity, things like that. Maybe even considering additional vehicles for this type of planning. So maybe talking about a trust instead of an LLC. There's even been some talks about maybe even new types of entities that don't exist right now. So not an LLC, not a partnership. There might be new types of entities that actually don't report to the state to try to get around these. Because remember, that was one of the requirements of whether I need to submit this information, is whether I filed something with the state to do business here. So maybe there's going to be some new entities that come out of this. We will be staying on top of these developments. And then again, we're going to help you guys to come up with a system of how are we going to track these changes? Did somebody acquire more than they had 15% interest, but now they have 25% and now have to go into that? When people reach the age of majority, if there's new trustees that are involved in a trust. So very common with a trust where we have person-formed trust, we call them the grantor or settlor, who is also the trustee. Well, they've become incapacitated and now there's a new trustee in charge of things. Does that mean we have to report again? We're going to have to keep track of these changes. So we'll help come up with a plan for tracking and making sure that these reports are being submitted when they need to be. That is really all that I had for today. So I'm seeing a few comments here. I don't know if this is, I think this is Meredith maybe on here that's talking about land trusts are not going to be a big deal again. They've really gone by the wayside, especially in Florida, not really being as big of a deal, we're really just focusing on revocable trusts, because they do a lot more than land trust does, obviously. But this might be a perfect example of why we do a land trust instead of an LLC. Um, yeah, that is a great point. And there's a lot more detail that goes into this, as far as how trusts interact with this, which is really interesting. I knew that that wasn't, something that's really most of the general public will, they'd be more concerned about the business side of it than the trust side of it. But of course, that's something that we are looking into to see whether, what trustees have to report, what settlors or grantors have to report, um, who ha- so what beneficiaries of the trust are going to have to report, depending on whether they have a present interest, whether they can demand withdrawals of principal or income, um, things like that. It's going to be a lot. Trust protectors are also going to probably have to start reporting depending on what they are in control of, which is another interesting thing. So there's a comment here, which again, I think is from Meredith. It's saying a detailed land trust would protect your identity and could provide some of the same business rules without having to report to the state. So again, like I had said, they might be discussing new entities. Here's something that we already kind of have in place, especially in Florida, because we have a very specific land trust act, where you can have the same rules about what happens to the property while whoever owns it, whoever the beneficial interest goes to after, um, and we don't have to report that to the state. So that's going to keep us out of the BOI reporting, but then we don't have the same kind of asset protection that we would have had with an LLC. But maybe it's worth it to get around this. Again, I don't know moving forward that this is going to be a big reason not to form LLCs unless you are wanting to protect your privacy for whatever reason that might be. But it's not like this is going to be an ongoing really hard thing as long as you have a plan in place of, okay, when these changes happen, I know I need to submit something. But it's not like an annual thing. We're not having to charge for it every year. You don't have to pay the government. It's $150 every time you submit this, like you do when you form a new entity, things like that. Does anybody have any general questions about this or anything else? We still are scheduled to be on here for another 30 minutes. So right. I'll give it a couple more minutes to see if anything else pops up. Feel free to put it in the comments. I see there's a few of you on here. So I do just want to thank you all for joining us on the first Ask an Attorney Anything. I'm very happy that I got to be the one to do the first, and I'm looking forward to do this again, maybe on estate planning next time. But you'll get to hear from all of our attorneys in the office at some points. And then, yeah, in the chats, we mentioned that we do have multiple locations. Right now, we have locations in Claremont, Winter Garden, and the Villages. So you can give us a call at 352-394-7408 to get scheduled to speak with one of our attorneys about this specific issue or anything else. We do everything pretty much besides criminal and tax law. So we are happy to help you with whatever you guys have going on. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. So again, thank you for joining us today. I know it was a interesting afternoon, and again, sorry for the delay with the technical issues, but now we have it figured out moving forward and we won't have any more delays. Um, it was great to be here with you all today. This will be saved to our profile, I believe, so you can rewatch it anytime. And then we hope to hear from you soon. Bye. Have a good rest of your day and happy weekend almost.